In today's episode of the Daily Brief, I'll talk about two interesting stories. I first talk about Tata Communications, and finally, I talk about television, speculation, and manipulation. Welcome back to the Daily Brief show by Zerodha, where our aim is to simplify the biggest news in the financial markets in a way that's one level deeper as compared to news channels. I'm your host Akshara, and today is Wednesday, 30th July. Coming to the first story. So, Tata Communications recently noted that the Department of Telecommunications, or DOT, had issued it a Rs 7,827.55 crore demand notice. Why? Because it landed in the same soup that has haunted so much of India's telecom sector: unpaid AGR dues. But here's the thing. Before this, you've probably seen the term AGR dues pop up alongside the names of mobile operators like Vodafone India or Bharti Airtel. But Tata Communications isn't a mobile operator. It doesn't sell SIM cards. It doesn't offer prepaid plans. So, what is it doing in the middle of this mess? To understand what's happening, let's go all the way back to a time when Tata Communications wasn't even a Tata company. So, before Tata Communications, there came a company called VSNL, or Videsh Sanchar Nigam Limited. This government-owned telecom giant was created in the late 1980s with a very specific purpose: handling India's international telecom traffic. If you made an overseas call from India in the 1990s, it was probably routed through VSNL. Now, this company held a monopoly over India's international long-distance or ILD gateways. It was, in a sense, the only company legally allowed to connect India to the outside world. Any communication entering or leaving our country, phone calls, faxes, data, and more, would first pass through VSNL's equipment. It ran giant satellite dishes and the stations where international underwater cables reached India and switching centers that routed international traffic. VSNL was, in short, the bridge between India and the world. So in 2002, as part of the Indian government's disinvestment program, it sold a 25% strategic stake in VSNL to the Tata Group, along with management control over the company. Over time, the Tatas kept increasing their holding, rebranding the company as Tata Communications in 2008. The government held on to 26% of the company until 2021, when it made its final exit. But crucially, the licenses that VSNL had for international long distance and later for national long distance and internet services remained in force. And these were telecom licenses. And that's where the AGR story begins. So, what are AGRs? And why do they even matter? See, back in the 1990s, India's telecom industry looked very different from what it does today. Private operators were struggling to stay afloat, and the government's license fee model at the time was simple but brutal. You had to pay it a fixed fee regardless of whether your business made money or not. Only most operators were loss-making, and these fees were bleeding them dry. So in 1999, the government offered a compromise. Operators could migrate to a revenue sharing model. Instead of that fixed fee, they could pay the government a 15% share of their revenues every quarter. It looked like a win-win. The government got a cut, but not at the cost of putting operators in jeopardy. But there was a catch in the fine print. Under the new model, operators had to pay a percentage of what was called AGR, or adjusted gross revenue. But what all came under this revenue? The language of the license was hardly clear. See, everyone thought that this AGR would be a share of the revenue someone got from telecom services. But that wasn't what the government had in mind. Its agreements lumped any other miscellaneous revenue under the umbrella of gross revenue, and that meant it had a stake in everything else a telecom company earned. To the government, the AGR would practically include every single rupee of a telecom company's income, even if that income didn't actually come from telecom. Interest on bank deposits? Part of AGR. Rent from office buildings? AGR as well. Profits from selling scrap? Still AGR. Naturally, telecom companies pushed back. To them, this understanding of AGR was simply too wide. And the broader the definition of AGR became, the more they would have to pay. And so in 2003, they took the matter to the TDSAT, which is India's Telecom Tribunal. The TDSAT, by and large, agreed with them. While some ancillary matters like roaming charges or money from handset sales could be brought into the AGR, not everything fit the definition. Non-telecom revenues were definitely not part of it. You couldn't bring dividends, capital gains, rents from property, etc. under this umbrella. But the government wasn't happy with this, and so it went to the Supreme Court. And in 2011, the Supreme Court disagreed with TDSAT. The terms of the license, it said, were fixed. Any revenues these companies made, whether from telecom services or not, would have to be shared with the government. Giving the license any other meaning would be as good as rewriting it. The court effectively told telecom companies, you signed a contract and you're now bound by it. If you had a problem with this, you should have complained back in 1999 and not now. The case from here would take a convoluted path. It would go back to the TDSAT before finding its way to the Supreme Court again. But this understanding would stick, paving the way for a 2019 ruling of the Supreme Court, which would deliver the final word on the AGR matter. So, after a long, meandering journey, in October 2019, the Supreme Court gave its final word on the matter. The government's definition of AGR was valid. Every rupee of revenue, telecom and non telecom, would be included when calculating the dues telecom companies owed. But that wasn't all. Operators had now been paying lower dues for over 15 years. And so the government asked for 12 to 16% compound interest. It also slapped telecom operators with penalties, and then it charged extra interest on those penalties. With all of this included, the total amount in dispute went from rupees 23,000 crore to over 6 times as much, rupees 1.47 lakh crore, all of which would have to be paid within the next 3 months. Now, the findings ripped through the industry. Vodafone Idea was completely crushed with more than rupees 58,000 crore in back dues. Airtel was hit by a bill of over rupees 40,000 crore. So these companies paid what they could. Airtel somehow found enough cash to pay some of the demand. Vodafone Idea, on the other hand, was already struggling with its finances and simply had no money to spare. Its dues have grown to over rupees 84,000 crore by now, and it no longer has the cash to make a single year's pay. The government is now looking for new ways to make things sustainable for the company. Things were starting to get desperate. In 2020, with a looming risk of systemic collapse, the Supreme Court allowed the telcos to pay their dues over 10 years, from 2021 to 2031. And in 2021, the government went one step further. It changed the AGR definition for the future. So from October 2021 onwards, non telecom revenues were excluded. Only the past dues stayed. The court had already ruled on them, and the matter was final. So, why is Tata Communications involved? Now, Tata Communications isn't a consumer mobile operator. It doesn't offer 4G or 5G data plans. Its business is different. Operating submarine cables, hosting cloud computing platforms, managing enterprise networks, and providing other essential internet infrastructure. Yet, Tata Communications still holds telecom licenses. It had these to run long distance calls and internet services, and that pushed it too into the fray. These licenses, though not for mobile consumer services, were issued under the same old revenue sharing regime from 1999. They contain the same critical clauses, including the broad definition of gross revenue. Once the Supreme Court upheld the government's expansive interpretation of AGR in its landmark October 2019 judgment, any licensee operating under that 1999 licensing framework was suddenly caught by that same interpretation. Now, Tata naturally disagrees. It wasn't even a party to this matter, and it had its own case going on before the Supreme Court, separate from those of all the mobile services companies. Nevertheless, it still got pulled in. It too was covered by the same revenue sharing model, and therefore the government has asked it to cough up similar dues. In August and September 2019, just weeks before the Supreme Court's AGR verdict, Tata Communications received demand notices from the DOT for license fees dating from FY 2006-7 to FY 17-18, initially totaling Rs 6,633 crore. And part of this amount came from the dues. Part of it came from all the additional payments the Supreme Court would eventually sanction: interest, penalties, and interest on penalties. Tata Communications immediately challenged these demands. It continued to dispute these demands even after the Supreme Court's ruling, maintaining that the judgment did not apply to its specific licenses. Despite disagreeing, however, it had to pay out Rs 379.5 crore in March 2021 under protest. Not because it agreed that it was liable, but because it wanted to avoid additional interest and penalties. And things didn't stop there, of course. Between July 2023 and January 2025, Tata Communications continued to receive a string of demand notices from the DOT, seeking payment for an ever larger period. The latest of these notices asks it to hand over more than Rs 7,800 crore. Now, whenever mobile operators tried addressing these dues, the Supreme Court made it abundantly clear that it's in no mood to reconsider things. The initial licenses may have been broadly worded, but nobody forced anyone to accept that regime. This was simply the risk of getting into a regulated business like telecom. If that principle works for mobile operators, can it be any different for others? Tata Communications is trying to find a way to claim otherwise. It insists that its licenses, services, and business model differ significantly from mobile telecom operators, and therefore the AGI ruling shouldn't apply to it. But as far as the Department of Telecommunications is concerned, the nature of the business simply doesn't matter. All that matters are the original contractual terms of the license. So if the license includes the 1999 AGR clause, the Supreme Court judgment applies. The legal dispute continues, and Tata Communications so far has contested each new demand at the TDSAT. It'll probably continue to do so, but will it manage to get a different legal answer? Only time will tell. Now, coming to the second story about television, speculation, and manipulation. So, there's a dark side to business news. Ever so often, the very people we trust to interpret the markets use their platforms for personal gain. They plant ideas, stir excitement, and cash in before anyone realizes what's happening. Back in March, we talked about how a famous TV personality used their fame to manipulate the markets. And last month, we covered yet another. And now we're back again with yet another SEBI order, featuring more television talking heads that tried to turn their fame into a quick buck. This time, SEBI has set its sights on a group of guest experts on Zee Business. According to the regulator, these pundits were leaking their upcoming on-air stock recommendations before broadcast, letting certain shady operators make money through well-timed trades. As if Zee wasn't in enough trouble already with its various corporate challenges, this case adds another layer of controversy around the television network. So let's break down how the operation worked and why SEBI stepped in. SEBI's recent order zeroed in on stock tips from guest experts featured on Zee Business between February and December 2022 and a series of suspicious trades that would follow. To untangle the scheme, the regulator broke down the players into three roles. The first one, guest experts. These were familiar faces and voices on Zee Business with sizable social media followings. According to SEBI, these market commentators would tip off the profit makers with their on-air recommendations before they hit the broadcast. The second, profit makers. These were the operators who actually cashed in by executing suspicious trades. To be clear, from what we know, none of them were actually part of Zee Business. They were outsiders who allegedly got advance access to the tips. And third, enablers. This was the backstage crew of the operation who made it all possible. They provided trading accounts, login credentials, and system access, allowing the profit makers to execute their scheme. Over the 11 months that SEBI observed, it found hundreds of instances across different dates where you could see a rather clear pattern emerge. First, profit makers would enter positions into some securities right before they were recommended on television. This pattern was so consistent that it seemed they knew exactly what would be recommended and when. Soon afterwards, those recommendations were aired live on television. Regular folk would buy the stocks they recommended, pushing up their price. And as that happened, those same profit makers would close their positions, pocketing the difference between their early entry price and the elevated post-recommendation price. It's these profit makers and their suspicious trades that SEBI has gone after. Now, taking those positions isn't an offense, nor is closing them when prices would jump. None of this would be a problem if the profit makers just happened to make their trades at the right time. But this isn't what SEBI saw. There were simply too many coincidences at play. And to SEBI, everything seemed to run around the recommendations that would appear on television. Whenever a recommendation was made on air, trading volumes would surge dramatically. And that surge was immediate. The price of those stocks would be relatively stable before a recommendation. So there was nothing to suggest that a surge was on the cards. But as they were recommended and immediately after, there would be a sudden spike in volatility. The profit makers would jump in at precisely the same time. Compared to their normal trading behavior, their trading behavior on recommendation days was dramatically higher. There was something fishy behind the scenes. In many cases, in fact, the profit makers' trades represented an unusually high percentage of total market activity in the recommended securities. But beyond all of this, there was one smoking gun: internal communication. This was the hidden link between guests and the profit makers. Now, SEBI went through WhatsApp chat records, call data records, and Telegram messages, all of which pointed to one thing: advanced information sharing between guest experts and profit makers. In many cases, there was clear proof that guest experts were in touch with these profit makers. And by checking the timing of these, SEBI found that profit makers would place their buy orders within minutes of receiving these messages. And they would close their positions immediately after those recommendations went public. Now, there were also messages between profit makers where they shared their profit calculations and coordinated their activities. Clearly, they weren't working in isolation. This was evidently a planned operation, not just lucky trading. One of the clearest examples of this scheme in action was the Balrampur Chini case. On the morning of August 25, 2022, guest expert Simir Baumik recommended buying the shares of Balrampur Chini on Zee Business. Now, these recommendations were made at 10:42 a.m. But just 21 minutes before, at 10:21 a.m., she had shared that very recommendation with one of the profit makers, Partha Sarathi Dhar, on WhatsApp. Starting at 10:35 a.m., just 7 minutes before the recommendation would go live, Partha Sarathi Dhar began buying 33,600 Balrampur Chini futures. At the very same time, another of the profit makers, Manan Sharecom Private Limited, started buying 1,08,800 Balrampur Chini call options. When Baumik's recommendation came, it clearly moved the markets. There was a notable bump in the trading activity that could be traced to the very minute the recommendations were going live. And right as the recommendations were going up, they placed limit sell orders. These would be executed as soon as the prices of those instruments hit a higher price. And that's precisely what happened. Prices shot up. Their sell orders were executed. In less than 10 minutes, Dhar made a profit of over rupees 1 lakh. Manan Sharecom made a profit of rupees 1.7 lakh. And this was just one case. SEBI saw the same thing repeat itself again and again. So when SEBI started looking into this matter, 15 entities came under its radar. 10 managed to settle the case without a formal admission of guilt, and the 5 that SEBI eventually went after were those that couldn't. Not because they hadn't tried, but because the settlement applications were rejected. As SEBI held, whenever a TV personality shares their stock recommendation, that's non-public information. It's something that predictably moves the market. So anyone with this information is at an inherent advantage. If they know what recommendations are coming when, they can profit at the expense of ordinary investors. Any such trade to SEBI was illicit. Over the 9 months that SEBI studied, it spotted a total of rupees 7.41 crore of illicit gains that the profit makers raked in through the scheme, ranging from rupees 53.84 lakh that Parthasarathi Dhar profited by to rupees 4.73 crore lapped up by the company SAAR Commodities Private Limited, and there may well be more. And so it slapped the profit makers in its scanner with a total of rupees 4 crore in penalties, apart from gouging back the rupees 7.41 crore they already made. But there was one person that SEBI let free: the guest expert Himanshu Gupta. Although there were 208 different trades that the profit makers made following his recommendations, there was simply nothing linking him to the profit makers. There were some phone calls it found between him and other experts, but nothing that connected him to the profit makers. And so all charges against him were dropped and earlier restrictions were lifted. At the end of the day, though, this case serves as a reminder that on the stock markets, the playing field is not always level. SEBI can occasionally come in to bring balance, but it won't always catch people on time. Now, this is a lesson you need to learn if you're a retail investor who follows stock recommendations on business channels. You can't outsource your decision making to what experts tell you. Markets reward vigilance, not blind trust. So, the next time a market guru makes a call on live TV, remember, someone might already be cashing out before you've even tuned in. Now coming to the tidbits. IndusInd's troubles worsened after a rupees 1,600 crore accounting fiasco in Q4. So in the first quarter of FY26, net profit slumped 72% year-on-year to rupees 604 crore, dragged down by a 68% rise in provisions and a 14% drop in net interest income. Loan book contracted 4% year-on-year, while the bank continued to battle rising stress in microfinance, CVs and tractors. While the bank claims the legacy impact is now behind them, the real challenge is regaining market and investor confidence after back to back credibility shocks. Coming to the next tidbit. Remember the huge splash the Starlink deals made? Starlink satellite internet services is set to launch in India, but its impact on local telecom providers is expected to be minimal, according to the Minister of State of Communications. The service is capped at 2 million users nationwide, with high equipment costs and limited coverage, making it a niche offering for enterprises and remote areas. Now, coming to the next tidbit. We questioned whether India could really be a major producer of Apple's iPhones. Now, India has surpassed China as the leading source of smartphones sold in the US, accounting for 44% of the market in Q2 2025. This shift is largely due to Apple's strategic move to relocate iPhone production to India, aiming to mitigate risks associated with US China trade tensions. Now, coming to the next tidbit. India's Torrent Pharmaceuticals reported a 20% rise in Q1 profit, reaching Rs 548 crore, driven by strong domestic demand for chronic disease treatments. Revenue grew 11% to Rs 3,178 crore, with India contributing over half, led by therapies for diabetes, cardiovascular, and anti-infective conditions. Now coming to the final tidbit. Kotak Mahindra Bank's Q1 profit fell 47.5% to Rs 3,281 crore, missing estimates due to higher provisions and a narrower net interest margin. Asset quality worsened, with gross non-performing assets rising to 1.48%, promoting analysts to lower their price targets. That's all the news I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.
Disclaimer: this content is for informational purposes only. None of the stocks, brands, or products mentioned are recommendations or endorsements.